back. We're back. What a first half. We've got a lot to live up to, I think. So in terms of the running order, I'm going to start off with a few questions, get everyone talking. We've got 2 mics, so if I could hand that to you, we'll pass it around between you to get some input. When it comes to questions from the audience, we're going to try shouting. If that doesn't work, we'll hand one of these mics out and we'll make do with the 2 mics that we've got. You may have noticed we've grown a person. So first of all, welcome Don. If we could slide the mic down to Don, let's have a quick intro, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Don. I support data for personal banking. So very similar to what Izzy is doing for business banking. I look after the retail side of our app experience, basically.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I guess to kick things off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of experimentation. I think it's very clear it's part of the culture at Monzo, which I'm going to come to if that's okay. But I'd like to kick off by asking, do you experiment on every change that you make? If not, how do you decide when to experiment and what other approaches you may take? So I don't know who would like to start with that question.
Don, you've got the mic.
Fine. I'll give it a go. No, we can't taste everything. Of course, it would be brilliant if we can have perfect information about everything. I think that's true for every business out there. You probably want to have amazing information, be super data driven, have the perfect answer for everything. But ultimately, a bit of common sense, user research, product intuition, looking at what your metrics are doing, data analysis. There's a lot of things that can tell you already what to do that doesn't require necessarily an experiment. And so the experimentation is definitely there to validate, and a lot of times to kind of validate a very important and critical hypotheses, but not everything requires an experiment. So I think it's this amazing data team basically trying to kind of help us out to kind of make those decisions.
Anything to add from anyone else? My boy Don's done it, well done. Great first answer, well done, well done. We talked a bit about culture. I think in listening to the talk, it was really clear to me, you've got to have it as the culture of the company. People have got to be bought into this from the very top, right the way down through the whole data team and stuff like that. So I was wondering if one of you could perhaps speak to the culture at Monzo and what that looks like in terms of experimentation.
Specifically in terms of experimentation or more generally?
Yeah, we'll go both. We're going to sell Monzo, so tell us all about it.
Okay, so well, hopefully, as it should have come across from the talks, we are a very data-driven organisation. We get a lot of buy-in from really senior stakeholders, and if anything, we're kind of being challenged. Can we be even more data-driven? Can we use data in more ways? For me, that was one of the major reasons for joining Monzo. I'm not going to name the previous employer that it was, but when I'm producing a deck for the CFO, I was asked, can you fudge that line so it looks like this, because the last deck had that, and I know it was wrong, but we want to show them the same thing. It's yeah, that's not really integrity or data-driven, is it? That's the doodling on PowerPoint. So that was one of the main attractions for joining Monzo. Very data-driven. There's a lot of appetite across the business to get our support.
Amazing. Keep it coming.
I can add to that. So I think when it comes to culture and experimentation within the culture itself, it's really important that the whole team, it's not a data people thing. It's not data people running experiments, it's the entire product team running experiments. And so when we work in our product squads, we work with engineers, we work with product managers, we work with designers, and we all work together to launch an experiment. So it's not just, the data people are there to support and design the experiment and make sure that the data makes sense. But at the end of the day, it's a product thing, and it's a team thing. It's the entire team working together to launch an experiment. And what makes this really great is that at Monzo, there's great internal tooling to actually launch lots of experiments quickly. And that takes away the barrier for people to just launch their own experiments when they need to. And that makes engineers, especially software engineers, very excited about running and launching experiments. So yeah, it's definitely embedded in the product culture.
I've got one really small thing to add to that. So one of the biggest wins, I think, for business banking or the business banking data team in the last month has been the product squad actually launching their experiment without any like data support whatsoever. And on the surface, that sounds pretty scary, right? But actually, I think it's a testament to definitely the culture, but as Izak touched upon, all of the tooling that we have as well. So we have sample sizing calculators that can help the engineers out, the tooling, they can set it up themselves, we've got all automated dashboards, etc. And I think that's a really amazing part of the culture where the whole team is driving that experimentation. It's not the data team pushing them and trying to get them set it up in a proper way. It just comes as kind of, natural to them. And it's, yeah.
Sounds fantastic. As we were talking there, has anyone been on Doug's LinkedIn just to check where he previously worked? Naming no names, but if we could, if we could discuss afterwards, that would be perfect. As you have the mic, the example with the food truck was like really cool. Obviously, Monzo are a big organisation now. I know you've still got very much startup mentality, but 7 million customers. You're a big player in banking. Talk us through how that comes about. You know, did you have to talk to leadership? How did you get approval to go do it? You know, it's a really innovative thing that I would associate perhaps with a 6-person startup, and we're here with a company valued at billions. So could you tell us a bit more about how that came about?
Yeah, of course. So it literally came about from, as I said, a bunch of people going to lunch. I think one of the things about everyone at Monzo is everyone really has a sense of ownership and really wants to see Monzo be as successful as possible, but also see our small businesses. And I'm going to talk about it from a business perspective. So apologies because I'm biased there, but really want to see our small businesses be as successful as possible. And I think there's nothing better than seeing someone close to home use their Monzo business account. And we want to just see how we can make their lives easier and ultimately give them more time to spend on their business. So in terms of how it came about, it was literally just that. It was a bunch of people that went for lunch, came back, and our product squads are super, they have really good ownership and they can ultimately, ship whatever they want within reason. So it was a bunch of people, actually wasn't from one specific squad, it was from across the squad. It was engineers that came together, there was a data person that came, a great data scientist in our team, as well as then a PM to think about it more from a business perspective. All came together, everyone was super excited to actually see it play out in real life. So spent literally 40 hours on something, kind of hacking it together. It was by no means perfect, but it did the job. So in terms of your question, go for lunch, go for lunch with your colleagues, don't work from home all the time, and come up with something and work together as a team to get something out.
Amazing, amazing. I think that was a verbal advert to come and find out a bit more about Monzo. So my man Neil, give him a little hands up, Neil, come on. Talk to Neil. I'm going to ask a couple more questions. I've already seen a couple of hands twitching, so I'll be coming to you. Start thinking, 2 more from me, and then no one wants to hear from Dave, so we'll be coming to you guys out there as well. So you talked a bit about the mindset, bringing teams together. It's a whole collaboration of skills, it's cross-functional. Could you tell us a bit more about how you ensure effective collaboration between the teams? How do you structure the teams? Data scientists, engineers, other stakeholders to get the best out of data at Monzo? Where are we going? Everyone can answer it, but we'll take 2 answers. We'll take 2 answers if we have to.
I can say. So I can say how it's how the current structure is that I kind of find myself in day to day. We organize ourselves into product squads, and the product squad generally consists of product manager, which looks after the product vision and journey, and then some engineers that might be back-end engineers, mobile engineers, front-end engineers, depending on the need, and that's generally supported by a data scientist or analyst or analytics engineer. And it's having all those skills together that then work towards a common goal. And those goals are set at the start of a planning cycle. So that's generally how we foster the collaboration between different skill sets. Anything to add?
And I think you've heard us talk about different areas of the business, like for example, personal banking, business banking, these are kind of the collectives we have within the company. And so that's where we bring all of these different groups together, all of these different squads. And so like that's how we even further foster kind of cohesive collaboration in these areas. And then also between the collectives, of course, we talk a lot to each other. We have like common reviews. And so that way we make sure that we all kind of keep closely connected. We have also like different ways that data just tends to get together, like different ways we can share insights with each other, different ways we can kind of like hang out and like be social. So there's a lot of ways we kind of just keep in touch with each other.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are obviously here talking about experimentation. So I feel like we should ask a few questions around that rather than talking about culture the whole evening. I would like to know, what are some of the common mistakes you've seen in setting up experiments correctly? And I'll maybe come to Doug first. He's going in, I can tell. I've gone to the guy with the biggest opinion straight away.
Or maybe the most controversial opinions. But to be fair, I've not really seen any mistakes being made at Monzo, and that's not just a biased way of saying that. I think that's because we do have very good tooling, very good training, and very high quality people. At previous companies, there's...
Come on, someone tell me, where did he work? Yeah. We must have checked.
I've worked at a lot of companies, so you'll be guessing. A lot of the times it's simple things that really should be under your control. So things like, not using a sample size calculator, not understanding what you're fundamentally trying to drive, or doing an experiment because that's what you read you're supposed to do without having a clear understanding of what outcome are you actually trying to drive for the business. And as Don said earlier, have you looked at other ways of making that decision? Are we sure an experiment is really, really necessary? So I'd broadly say mistakes either come from the sort of statistical kind of end of things, where people use the kind of wrong study design, wrong sample size, wrong experimental measure, but then also the kind of implementation of it is also quite important. So for example, like looking at the results early and then making a decision because something looks great in the first week, and then assuming that's going to continue, so not accounting for seasonality. Equally important is not having that plan in place for, if we do get the result we look like we're looking for, how are we going to implement it? That plan should be in place. So how you're going to exploit success should be defined up front.
Excellent.
Maybe add to that.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, so issues that we that we have run into in the past. Study design, it's actually more complicated than I try to make it appear on my presentation. It can get quite complex, especially when you think about the multiple interactions and the correlations between different observations. If you think about larger types of experiments, when we have a whole system and you have network effects within the system, things become really complicated really quickly. And yeah, those types of experiments, often after the fact realize, oh, okay, yeah, the design was actually not completely suitable. We should have done something else. So yeah, on the statistical side, it does get quite challenging. On the more business side of things, I've seen cases where we launch experiments without really checking if the change that we want to observe is actually observable. So we're looking for changes in metrics, but those metrics are very, very static. And yeah, like just making sure that an experiment is the right way to go ahead, because it is really easy to launch an experiment. It's not necessarily the right thing to do.
Amazing. Thank you very much. There's some questions. Okay, I'm a glutton for punishment, but I've gone straight to the back. And we're going to try shouting. Should we try it? And if need be, we'll get you a microphone.
How about this? Can you hear me?
Well, you can hear. We'll repeat the question back as well for the audience.
Okay. I have two questions. One is technical, one is comfort. You can choose either one or both of them. It's up to you. The technical one was about the experimentation presentation you just had. My question was, what kind of factors you considered before you chose difference in difference, this specific causal model, and this specific quasi-experimentation design instead of so many other choices? That's the first question. And the second one is about innovation, because we know those areas you covered, there are so many different models, new ones, old ones, classical ones, innovative ones, that there are papers to read. How do you facilitate this innovation inside the team, and what kind of exercise or things you think you do in this area? Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. First question, and she's asked two. I like her style. This is good. I'm normally much more strict than this. Okay, so there was a question about culture and there's a question for a specific speaker. Let's go with the specific speaker first, and we're going to answer both questions. Why not? I always love a bit of innovation. So if you could repeat the technical question back and then answer, please.
Sure. So the question was, why did I decide to go with the difference in difference approach as opposed to another non-experimental causal inference methodology? The kind of really, there's two answers to that. One is a very, very pragmatic answer, which was it was going to be the quickest way of doing it, which, you know, it sounds slightly kind of trite, but when you're working in a company that's got a big workload, that's actually like a really important thing. It's like, we want a decision. Is it going to be 100% right in 2 weeks or 90% right today? And, you know, 9 times out of 10 would go for 90% right today. Hopefully Don and Chris at the back would agree with that. The other one is basically by, you know, kind of approach of what method would actually work. So discontinuity regression wouldn't have worked in this case. Neither would instrument variables, and basically that combined with the ease of doing difference in difference. And again, I guess the third point would also be, I knew if I was asked to explain that to someone kind of senior that is non-technical and non-data related, that hopefully all agree that that sort of 2-line chart graph is very, very easy for someone to understand really what's going on, even if the actual maths is slightly more complicated in the regression equation. So yeah, hopefully that answers the first question.
Perfect. And then the second question, how do you make sure the team keep learning, innovating, and growing?
So for me, I think that this is something that one is part of the culture at Monzo. So that has to be part of it. If the organization you work for doesn't value it, it probably won't get done. So that means the tone from the top, and then us as kind of managers, we need to give our team the space to do that. So I'm constantly, when I have kind of one-to-ones with my team, checking in and, you know, what are they trying to kind of work on? Are they setting aside time to do something, whether it's Coursera, whether it's just reading papers, reading a textbook, cargo competitions, like, you know, whatever, it's making sure people have the time to do it. And also I kind of believe like setting a good example. So although increasingly my time doing kind of data science work, particularly as the teams I've now joined, is less, I still try and dedicate some of my time to picking up something new so that they can see as you go up through the grades at Monzo, it's still expected and encouraged that you work on your technical knowledge.
Nice, that's good to hear. I'm going to throw one in for myself. So a lot of the people here, obviously, well, they're all data people. They may or may not be interviewing. They've certainly interviewed in the past. If you were going to flip it on its head and say you're a candidate looking at a company, what questions should the candidate be asking of a company to understand, actually, are they data driven? Are they practicing what they preach? What should they be doing out there to interview the companies that they're hiring for? Come on, Don.
Yep. I mean, basically, almost going to flip the interview on its head. You're asked to give an example of, show me a time when you've done this. Ask the interviewer that. Like, you know, you talk about being a data-led organization. Give me an example of when the company made a decision based on some data that maybe went the way it wasn't expected to.
Mm-hmm. Anything else to add?
No, I was going to say the exact same thing. I actually interviewed at a place where I asked that exact question, and it basically got parried, and they just like went a completely different path and just never answered the question, which is of course then a hard no immediately. So I won't name the name of the company, but like, yes, I think it's a good question to ask.
A red flag. I'll come to you. Be very patient. Sorry.
That's all right. No. Yeah, thanks for the talk. So really great. And I just wanted to ask a question that kind of bridges between the cultural questions and the data science questions, which is, what is the potential for using data science to actually inform how you organise and what your culture actually is? And have you thought about that? I know it's a bit out of left field, so it's a bit unfair, but I just thought I'd put it out there.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Sorry.
So like, you have analytics, you have data about organisations, you have theory about organisational structure. You have obviously business schools churning out papers, which some will get very technical in terms of maybe the connections to other domains. You know, like from biology, ideas from biology about how to organise, which is something that I'm interested in. So do you, have you thought about that at all? And is that something you would be interested in exploring? Because if you're experiment led, like you don't experiment with your culture, or if you don't know how to experiment with your culture or what the options would be.
That's a definite thought-provoking question, 100%. So can you or should you A/B test how you structure your organisation? Could be a bit manic, I guess, but I don't know. Maybe we should talk about it over a beer.
I can go through.
We'll have a quick go at it, but we'll
So-
talk beer afterwards.
I don't think an A/B test would work here, because you'd have to structure your organization into two completely separate organizations and then see if one achieves results and one doesn't achieve results. So no A/B test here, but I think the question that you're asking is, do we change and respond to, do we change the way that we structure as an organization in response to how the teams are performing? And if that's the question, then yes. Whenever there's a new need arises, I think there's then a discussion around how should the team be structured, what is the setup needed, how many people are needed in different sets of teams to achieve optimal results. So in terms of like left field thinking, bringing biology into organizational structure, not sure, but responding to what works right now or what doesn't work right now is definitely something we do. Like we do change team structures if we need to.
Great answer. Thank you very much. I'm going to come for some more questions. There's several hands. I've not been to this side, so I'm going to go to the chap right at the back there, then I'll come back over here. I've seen a couple of people here as well. So.
I had a question for Doug, but he's answered a lot of questions.
Oh, he's passed. We'll come back to you. That was very...
Yeah, I'll still ask questions.
Oh, he's still asking a question. I thought he was being real polite. Come on, Doug. He's popular.
But because you were obviously talking about how you wanted to encourage user spending, I just wondered whether some of the moral implications of that were considered.
Ethics. We love an ethics chat.
So the question there was, when we're looking to encourage user spending, do we consider the ethical side of that? And the answer is yes, of course. And maybe I didn't make it particularly clear in my presentation, but when we talk about share of wallet, I was speaking to someone in the break and trying to define that a bit more. It's not that we want you to go out and spend money that you don't have and be irresponsible with your finances. That is like 180 degrees from Monzo's mission. But what we do want you to do is, if you're going to spend £100 at Sainsbury's, we want you to be spending it on your Monzo card, not your Barclays card or other banks that are available.
Good answer. Good answer. There was two here. I'll come to the chap with the glasses and then I'll go to the chap at the back afterwards.
Hi, first, thanks for talk. So, well, a few examples of the experiments that you run. You mentioned about like waiting for some trend to take off, like either client habits or the agent's learning curve. But like in general, do you have some guidelines for usual UX experiments for when to decide, well, it's time to close or winner assign an experiment? Like, is there like some tests that you run, minimum number of days that you wait, or is it like manual inspection? Can you discuss about that?
I'm going to start picking on speakers in a minute.
If what you're asking is how long should you wait until you finish an experiment, then the statistics gives you the answer. You need to set up your experiment in advance and say, this is the sample size that you need, and then afterwards you measure. If you don't do that, you end up like doing a lot of making a lot of statistical inferences when you shouldn't, and comparing doing more tests than you actually can. So what we usually do, or at least in the team that I'm in, you determine your sample size up front with a certain power and certain significance, and you see what sample size you need, and then you wait until that sample size has been reached. Once the sample size has been reached, then you make a call on whether the experiment results are significant or not in whichever direction.
Yeah, but sometimes it's not just about the number of units. It's about how long does it take for the effect to take as well. Like, if you take like one sample from first day of each agent that you had, it would not show up the learning curve that they would have with the case that you tested. So, I mean, looking over time, given that you have like a stable number of users already on the experiment, how do you determine if it's stable or not?
Yeah, I think what you're asking is what is the how exactly do we define the metrics that we then look at? And we do, for example, in the agent example and how long the time it takes them, we will consider how long it's taken for similar changes previously to really take effect. So say, for example, we think that there's a week learning time, we'll roll out a change, there's a week of learning time, and then we start measuring. So we do take those types of things into consideration. Yeah, like you basically think about similar learnings you can make from similar experiments that you've run in the past.
Sorry, I was just going to add two things to that. I think the answer, honestly, is it just depends on what experiment you're running. I think two things to take into consideration are seasonality. So sometimes definitely in business banking, we see that at the end of the month, we see the payment spike, etc., and behavior changes. So again, depending on your experiment, if it's a small copy change, then it won't impact you. But if it's something larger, then it might do. So I think you need to take into consideration seasonality. I think the other thing you need to take in consideration is just what is the action or behavior that you're trying to get your consumer or your business to do. So if it's looking at a trial of a paid offering, for example, maybe it's a free trial, we want to look at the uptake, but then actually we want to see the slightly longer term behavior, see if there's any pull forward effect, etc. So that's something we're going to have to take into consideration. So I think honestly the answer is it just completely depends on the experiment, the magnitude and the ultimate action. But to Izak's point, you can also look at previous experiments that we've run either in retail or business and start to get a judgment from that side.
I think it's clear you've got to have so much awareness as a data scientist, There isn't a clear-cut answer. So is there any more questions out there? I'm conscious I've not asked too many females, so I'd love to come to you, please.
It's just want to be sure, like, I'm believing that when you design your experiment, you use a risk-based approach to be able to decide, like, this is sample, and this is the risk if I don't do. I'm believing that is that correct, to use a risk-based approach to define which are your sample, what is going to be your outcome, what you're expecting, and the risk, like if it goes over this, will have an impact. If I have a smaller sample, maybe I'll get these results, but actually might be, the impact that, you say you evaluate the impact that have. I wonder if you use this approach, I guess.
I can take that. Or do you want to?
You can take it.
Oh.
I can add.
Okay, fab. So what I was saying, I think it comes back to, I think it was Doug that answered the question around kind of common pitfalls of experimentation. I think it's super important up front to define your success criteria, and part of that is going to be determining what your minimum detectable lift is. And so that's the typical trade-offs that we'll look at. We'll look at the minimum detectable lift, the number of customers or businesses that we need in the experiment as well. So I'd say that's kind of the risk, and I think it is really important that you determine that success criteria up front. And I think that's kind of how we approach it.
So I guess that for the changes that are less significant and less impact is when you don't need actually to simulate the testing, you just go with the biggest ones.
And I guess if they're that small, then the question would be, do we even need to experiment? If you're just changing a small button, or you're changing the color, or you're changing the copy, then I guess my question back to the PM or whoever it would be, do we actually need to use the resources, etc., to actually quantify the impact of this, or shall we just roll this out? Do you have anything to add?
I don't really have anything to add.
You can hold the mic.
Send it to Doug. Come on, Doug.
So I think, as a regulated bank, we should always be thinking about risk. There's no risk colleagues here tonight, but hopefully they're applauding somewhere. But when we come with the experiments, that is part of it. It's like, well, what happens if we're wrong, and what is the potential negative impact? So that's one of the reasons that we'd also look at guardrail metrics in most experiments. But also when we're looking at experiment design, is about how can we break this down, if it is a big change, to the smallest possible unit we can look at and still get the learning. And there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, I think different parts of the business may have slightly different risk appetites for different things. But you know, it is something we always consider. We should always be going back to our colleagues in risk and making sure they're aware of it, because we're not always aware of some of the risks that we're involved in. And to go back to my example about a kind of price change, that's actually like a very, very difficult area to experiment on, because there's a lot of regulatory interest and you know, customer fairness angles. So that risk is just one of the other angles, and that's where it then becomes full circle and important that experimentation is part of everyone's job and part of the wider culture. So we're getting everyone's input on it, and it's not just a task we're assigned to do and then we report the results.
Thank you. Perfect. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's more of a question for Issy. I think the improvement of the account creation that you mentioned, 10% was really big. I was just interested in knowing, maybe it's more of a technical question, whether it was like 3 individual tests combined to have 10%, or you implemented all the 3 things together and you got 10%, and maybe whether you have like tested interaction between them as well. And I think the second question would be the ideas that you have with the intro tour and also the stages of the application. Those are really great ideas. I was just wondering how you, like, your team came up with these ideas. Did you just like you said, go out for lunch and then brainstorm about it? Or maybe there was some like user research or studies, interviews that you have conducted that led to these great ideas?
Of course, so I'm going to answer the second one first because it's freshest, and then we can come back to the first one. So in terms of how we came up with the ideas, so the first piece of that was a data scientist pulling together that analysis, which looks at each of the different stages and the drop-off between each of those. Then what we did is we came together as a product team, so the PM, we had a user researcher, we had a product designer, etc., and engineers, and all jammed together as to ways in which we could reduce that drop-off and think about why that drop-off was. So for example, I think it was the first screen that showed where we changed the copy and we explained what a sole trader and what a limited company was. That was actually an idea that came from our designer, and he said, hey, like, I don't actually even understand your definitions here. He was quite new to the company, it was a month in. He said, look, I don't think I understand, and you know, I've been immersed into business banking for at least a month. Can we make these even simpler? So that's an example where it came from our designer. Some of the other examples later down the line came from, like you said, user research, for example, the in progress screen. I think that was actually an idea from a PM who had seen it somewhere else. And actually, I think it was something that personal banking were already doing. So it's very much a team effort. It started off, I'd say, with the data scientists bringing the insights and then everyone jamming together to think about the various hypotheses. In terms of how we ran that experiment and the 10%, so the 10% was the combination of all of those different changes that we made and the impact of rolling it out to 100% of the population, so of everyone who signs up. In terms of the actual design, we had a control hold out across, and then we compared the performance of each of those cells to the control and across each other.
Amazing. You didn't repeat back the part where she said how impressive the results were. Why didn't you mention that? Well done.
I mean, pat myself on the back.
There we go. Well done.
No, team effort.
Perfect. There's a question right at the back. You've been super patient, man. Thank you.
My question for you is chief data scientist. So we were talking about customer satisfaction, and we were talking about reducing the response time for using customers and agents who consume some customer services. So I was thinking, how do you measure customer satisfaction from reduced response time? Because at the same time, customers might not be satisfied with the response they're getting from the agents and so on. Why not use like other metrics? Why would that be like the major metrics you use to measure customer experience and satisfaction at Monzo?
Is the question, how do we measure customer satisfaction?
Yeah.
In
we're talking about the time you reduce time you use.
Yeah. So there's 2 metrics there, or there's a whole range of metrics in how you can use customer satisfaction. You can either measure it directly or you can measure it indirectly, and we have looked at both approaches. Measuring it directly would usually involve some kind of survey. You've probably seen net promoter score surveys or customer effort score surveys. We basically, after you have had an interaction with us, we send out a survey and we ask you how was this experience in handling your request. Some indirect methods you can use is basically to measure the engagement after an interaction. And we primarily use direct measurement, but we have looked at some of the indirect measurement as well.
Thank you very much.
Is there response rate good metrics for measuring customer satisfaction?
Sorry, is the question, is the response rate
The site response rate, is there good metrics to measure customer's satisfaction?
So we're not measuring we're not using the response the time to response as the customer satisfaction. We have separate metrics. We have the time it takes agents to work on tasks, and we also have separate metrics measuring the customer satisfaction. So there's multiple metrics being measured.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I'll maybe take one more from the audience, and then.
Yeah, sorry.
Perfect. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your presentations, by the way, especially Izzy and Tom. I want to ask you something. So obviously, right now we will, at least this evening, we were talking about business accounts, yes. And also at the same time, we are in some way talking about the customer service, general customer accounts. Have you guys ever thought that maybe some one or two maybe features of your business account might be quite useful for a customer account as well? So let's say, I think you were talking about the food stand, right? Yes. And being I'm sure you know that that guy's quite visible just next to you, and thankfully it's quite good areas like Moorgate. But you do get food stands in different other really shady areas as well. So I think that would be. Do you think that would be a good idea as such to have that sort of feature introduced into your customer accounts as well? That instead of taking a card out and you being nicked at the end of the day, okay, you might do something really simple.
Over to you, Izzy.
Yes, I can take that one. So actually that QR code, you can now use that on your personal account as well. So if you go into your Monzo app, shameless plug for Monzo, then if you click on the payment tab, then you can choose a QR code as one of the ways that you get paid. And I think it's actually the first option now. So absolutely, we definitely share ideas across business and across retail. I would say, I'll be really honest, we've stolen our fair share from retail as well, but like to think it's a two-way process. But absolutely, QR codes are available on the personal side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. I'm going to take one more question from this chap here, and then we're going to draw things to a close, if that's okay. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks a lot to the complete panel for these bite-sized videos and presentations. So I would say that, okay, we have heard a lot about data science, but like Doug, you already, I think you displayed in your presentation that data engineering or analytics engineering is also a part of data science within Monzo. Not many companies does that, but kudos to you guys. Just wanted to touch upon that part of the side as well. That what does the data engineering team looks like at Monzo? Does Monzo have an in-house infrastructure for that and not getting supported by any external cloud providers? A little bit on that.
Don, I feel like you've been a bit quiet recently.
Yeah, get it down to Don. Izzy, you should be the host. When we come back, you're in this chair. You're in this chair.
I will keep it relatively high level because there's a beautiful blog post about like the whole stack of like our data structure. So please, like a little bit of a plug for the blog post, but like please go have a read for this for sure. But yeah, we have a whole analytics engineering team. Like for example, personal banking. Like we have several analytics engineers like in my team as well as data scientists, and they work very closely together on making sure that like all the data is available, that like we have get all the insights right. The analytics engineers like look after a lot of our data assets, the pipelines, making sure that the data is high quality, like it's trustworthy. But we also encourage them to think about, like, from a product perspective, like how that impacts like the way they structure those things. They're heavily involved in metrics discussions, so they're like definitely close partners in all of the data discussions. And I think like various different teams, like I think, have analytics engineers across the space. We also have a central analytics engineering team too that looks more of kind of the more general platform situation. And then all questions, cloud, and all that stuff. Like, please have a read of the blog post because it gets very complex very quickly without a picture.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask finish with one question from myself for each of you. I always think it's nice with a panel to leave with a takeaway. So if I could ask each of you to either give us one prediction for the future of experimentation, or one tip for the audience, perhaps further reading, blog posts, whatever it may be. So if I could have one tip or prediction from each of you, please.
I'll do an experimentation-based prediction, or about experimentation. I think like the most standard experimentation setups are going to become increasingly more commoditized, I suspect. And I think we'll spend more and more time thinking about the kind of more problematic or harder to kind of solve problems. I think there's a lot of nuances about like two-sided market setups, about really intricate designs. For example, if you like look at the agent tech example that Izak gave, I think that's where we're going to spend more and more of our time, and a more typical kind of A/B testing kind of funnel optimization will be increasingly more commoditized.
Thank you very much. Doug?
I'll alternate and give a tip on how to kind of learn about it. I think there's a huge amount of kind of resources out there and lots of tools and calculators. My tip would be, before you start relying on tools and calculators, is spend a bit of time, make sure you understand the kind of basic theory behind it, because it will prevent a lot of kind of really straightforward mistakes.
Thank you, Doug.
So Dave actually pre-prepped us with this question, and I actually missed the part on experimentation. So I thought it was just one general life tip or life prediction. But if we're talking about experimentation, I would say my tip would be slow down to speed up. It's actually one of our principles here at Monzo in our data team, or values, or whatever you want to call it. But I think the worst experiment is one where you don't get any meaningful insights or results at the end of it. So it's super important that up front you design your success criteria, you define exactly what your hypothesis is, etc. And even if it takes you a week, 2 weeks longer, then it'll be worth it in the long term.
Hang on. You've had time to think of a life tip.
I was hoping you didn't ask me that.
What is the life tip? We need to know.
No, so I was thinking more about like predictions, and I'm in the market for a new car at the minute, and so I'm thinking, do I go electric? Do I still go petrol? And so my prediction was going to be that by 2030, then we haven't just moved to electric cars, we're still producing petrol and diesel. So apologies, no great life tip and no great prediction, but that's what's on my mind.
I love to hear it. And wear sunscreen. That's another life tip.
That's a good one.
Over to you.
Yeah, my prediction was also not experimentation related. It also wasn't a prediction, it was a wish. It was like, I think in terms of the next couple of years, I'd love to see lots more tech involvement in green energy, the green revolution. In terms of experimentation, go back to your stats textbooks from like university. I did that a lot over the past year and a half. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Back to school.